Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Hewitt podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Tuesday, the 18th of June here in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, France's political turmoil raises concerns over security policy around European capitals.
Labour taps HSBC and BlackRock for policy solutions on housing and energy.
Plus, we have a special report on a deadly mining complex powering the electric vehicle revolution.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The snap elections in France are casting uncertainty over plans to ramp up European Union spending on defence and a fresh push for support for Ukraine. It comes as the far-right National Rally Party has extended its lead over President Macron's party in polls. Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen says the European Union needs stability.
I mean, we are still in the middle of a war that's going on in Europe. We have a lot of challenges in front of us, especially on migration, climate change. We still need a social balanced European Union, and we need to have a stronger Europe in the future. So with all these challenges and all the decisions in front of us, I think it's important that we take a decision.
Denmark's Mette Frederiksen there speaking to Bloomberg after an informal meeting and referring to next week's summit where the recipients of top EU political jobs are expected to be confirmed. Deliberations on EU defence spending will also take place at that meeting. No matter the outcome of France's elections, President Macron will retain control of the military, but the government run by the Prime Minister will control the state budget.
Christine Lagarde says that her officials are watching market developments amidst the turbulence in France. The European Central Bank's president's comments come after a week of turmoil that wiped $258 billion from the market capitalisation of French stocks. Lagarde's comments also follow the ECB chief economist Philip Lane, who said that he is not worried about uncertainty in the country. Bloomberg's Caroline Conant says markets may not react well, though, to fiscal policy from the newly formed left-wing alliance.
If you look at the program of the far left, who is part of this Popular Front alliance of the left, it includes some proposals such as lowering the retirement age to 60, such as abolishing fiscal rules and possibly, according to Bruno Le Maire, at least an exit longer term down the road from the Eurozone.
Our Paris correspondent Caroline Conant speaking there. Bloomberg's poll of polls now shows Marine Le Pen's far-right national rally is in the lead, less than 2 weeks away from the first round of French voting.
Russian President Vladimir Putin will today visit North Korea for the first time in 24 years. The country is suspected of sending missiles and millions of rounds of munitions to help Moscow continue its offensive in Ukraine. Melinda Herring, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre, says while the trip is concerning, it's also a reminder of Putin's isolation on the world stage.
One thing that I would keep my eye on is, are they going to be cutting more deals to make sure that the Russians have enough shells? Two, I think it shows how isolated Vladimir Putin is. He doesn't have very many friends. He's got North Korea and he's got China and a few other people.
Melinda Herring says the fresh delivery of billions of dollars in arms from the US and European allies will need to be bolstered by further support next year. Vladimir Putin's visit to North Korea will be followed by a trip to Vietnam, where energy policy is expected to be in focus.
In the UK election campaign, Labour is turning to banks and asset managers for help finalising their infrastructure proposals. Bloomberg has learnt that the party's club of senior city executives has been asked to weigh in on its housing and energy policies. Bloomberg's James Wilcock has more.
Any future government has a dilemma. If it wants to invest to create growth, it can't risk overstretching the bond market after the Liz Truss era. For Labour Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, the answer is private sector investment. She met with her council of top executives in the city yesterday, and Bloomberg has learned they're being asked to help finalise detailed proposals so Reeves can start projects immediately if she were to win power in the election. But the open question is if simply changing the government and promising stability is enough to restore Britain's sluggish private investment. In London, James Wilcock, Bloomberg Radio.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies says Reform UK's spending plans do not add up. The independent think tank, which has costed all the parties' manifestos, has called Farage's policies problematic, pointing to large unfunded tax cuts and impossible spending plans. Reform UK's leader, Nigel Farage, says people shouldn't see it as a blueprint for government.
We are not pretending that we are going to win this general election. We are a very new political party. So this is not something with which we're going to govern the country. That's not possible, although this election is the first important step on the road to 2029.
Nigel Farage speaking at the manifesto launch yesterday. In total, Reform UK's plan includes £90 billion of tax cuts and £50 billion of spending increases, dwarfing the Conservative offer. The right-wing party has overtaken the Conservatives in some recent polls.
In corporate news, Apple is shutting down its Pay Later program, which allows customers to make purchases on an instalment plan. More now from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
It marks a retreat from efforts to offer more financial services in-house. The company says it's no longer offering loans for Apple Pay Later, which allowed users to pay off purchases of as much as $1,000 over 4 installments. The iPhone maker took the step after announcing that third-party services, such as ones from Affirm Holdings and Citigroup, will be integrated into its upcoming iOS 18 software. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
And the Boston Celtics beat the Dallas Mavericks 106-88 on Monday night to claim a record 18th NBA title. The 4-1 final series win gives the team one more title than their old rivals, the Los Angeles Lakers. Jaylen Brown, who's in the first of a 5-year, $286 million contract, was named the most valuable player of the NBA Finals. In a moment, we'll bring you more on the fears from EU leaders about the political turmoil in France and dig into our investigation into the dirty secret of the electric vehicle supply chain in Indonesia. But another story that caught our eye this morning about the difficulty of finding something real on the internet. Our colleague Amanda Mull's been writing about this in the context of a skincare product which she bought online, has been using for years, but she's still not sure if it's actually the real thing.
It's snail slime. I was just completely flabbergasted. It's a great hook into this story because apparently it is real. It's something that a South Korean brand has on offer, but as
big
Amanda,
on TikTok.
Yes, absolutely. As Amanda points out, it basically went viral online in 2023 and it put the Korean supplier under a huge amount of pressure, and therefore loads of opportunists kind of flooded the market with loads of knock-on products. And so, she weaves her story about the difficulties of telling real products from fakes.
Yeah, and it's also that question of what happens when your product, which might have been reasonably obscure, becomes a massive internet hit. And then there's, on one side, the people who flood into the market, buy everything that's available and then resell it at a higher price on resale sites. And then there's the others who are producing counterfeit versions of it. And she talked to the platforms about how they're tackling this.
Yes.
TikTok talking about, sellers having a problem with fakes as it blocks or removes millions of counterfeit products a year. Amazon's playing a similar game of whack-a-mole, as she describes it as well, trying to tackle some of the fake product listings as well. Also, though, I like that Amanda points out that this spawns a whole other question of people who actually spend their time hunting down fakes online. The Nancy Drews, as she puts them, of this world as well. So it's an online feeding frenzy, and you can read more about it from Amanda Mull on Bloomberg.com and on the terminal.
Well, let's turn our attention now to France and what's happening in Europe this morning. Political turmoil that could affect the EU overall and its efforts to beef up its defences, but also to support Ukraine. European leaders failed to agree on who will take the union's top jobs after the recent elections at a first informal dinner to discuss the issue. Bloomberg's Max Ramsey joins us now from Brussels for more on this. You were speaking to several of the leaders, Max. Good morning. Going into this meeting, what are they worried about then when it comes to the French elections, to the political uncertainty in France now, especially when it comes to defence? Should they be alarmed?
Good morning to you, Caroline. I mean, this decision from President Emmanuel Macron, it was, always going to loom large over this meeting of EU leaders. It was such a shock when he called it. I mean, I was there along with Stephen in the European Parliament when the French president made that announcement. And really the reaction was one of shock, because it seemed, such a major decision for him to make. And, there is a kind of diplomatic expectation among the leaders that, you will not speak too much, you will not criticize too much, one of your colleagues, because, it's one of the peculiarities of Brussels that, really there is this moment when leaders arrive and they walk down this red carpet, which gives many people flashbacks to the heights of Brexit negotiations. But then most leaders will come and they will take questions from the press, and you can ask anything. So many of them were asked about Brexit, of course, because we've seen the market impact that this decision has had, and the possible outcome could have. And no one wants to go too far on the record in talking about this. Some did. Mark Rutte was one of them. He said, that kind of very pointedly, he hopes that the French people, understand the enormity of the decision that they will make on these two rounds of elections. But what we are hearing, from sources from more off the record, is there is a lot of concern that essentially Macron's agenda, especially when it comes to defense and Ukraine, on which he's been very vocal, has basically come to a standstill, and nothing is getting done, and that's going to be the case until early July. And then, of course, we have to see what will happen in the election, because after that, there could be significantly more difficulties about getting what he wants, through the legislative process.
Max, thank you so much for being with us. Bloomberg's Max Ramsey there, live from Brussels.
Now, nickel is a critical component of the batteries that power electric cars, and Indonesia has become a global giant in producing the mineral. But there is a dirty and sometimes deadly secret behind its success story. Environmentalists accuse Indonesia's nickel industry of flouting environmental regulations, and fatal accidents at Chinese-owned mining facilities are not uncommon. Our senior reporter Matthew Campbell has been investigating this. He joins us now for more. Matthew, how big is this industry, first of all, in Indonesia, and how important is it to the global EV industry?
The nickel industry in Indonesia is absolutely enormous. We're talking tens of billions of dollars in annual exports from what are the largest nickel reserves in the world. And nickel has become a critical component in EV batteries, particularly in bigger, more expensive cars. So much so that we had Tesla warning a couple of weeks ago that without Indonesian nickel, specifically, the EV transition will not be possible.
Okay, so then what about the conditions at these plants?
Well, as my investigation shows, they are in many cases horrific. There have been a shocking number of fatal accidents. There was an explosion at a nickel facility in December that killed 21 people. There are smaller accidents all the time. This is really an ESG nightmare, and one that connects deep into the supply chain of big global car companies.
Is anything being done to improve safety at these plants?
The Chinese companies who operate these plants say they are taking steps to improve safety. I think there is grounds for considerable skepticism of that. The reason that Indonesian nickel has taken over the market, and it really has displaced everyone else, is that it is very, very cheap. And one of the reasons that it is so cheap is that labor and environmental standards are considerably lower than they would be almost anywhere else.
So then what about the pledges from the big car makers? How does that add up?
Well, car makers, of course, have ESG policies. They have sustainability reports. They have labor standards. The problem with nickel is, with some very small exceptions, car makers are not buying nickel directly. They are buying batteries. Their battery suppliers, in turn, are buying battery cathodes. Those, in turn, come from battery materials, and so on and so forth. So it's actually 5 or 6 steps down the line, and it's very hard to enforce standards at that level.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.